Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer, where we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating business evolution of green gold animations. We are tracking a really incredible journey today. We're looking at how one person, sitting in a modest home office, managed to build a massive, global 3D animation and licensing empire. Honestly, it's a brilliant masterclass in building intellectual property completely from the ground up.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at how they broke the outsourcing model, how they created original Indian IP, scaled into 3D, mastered merchandising, and finally, we'll examine the cultural impact and some of the criticisms of this mega franchise. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Breaking the outsourcing model.
So get a load of this number, 73%. Imagine, for a second, trying to build an entirely original brand when 73% of your entire industry's revenue is coming from foreign outsourcing. Well, that was a reality in India back in 2008. The domestic industry was just heavily skewed toward doing service work for international clients. Local creators were facing massive hurdles, inadequate equipment, a total lack of funding, and just fierce competition. With 8 of the top 10 animated shows on Indian television being imported, there was virtually zero room for domestic innovation.
The industry standard back then was pure service-based outsourcing. It was safe, it was client-driven, and sure, it paid the bills, but it completely lacked any domestic innovation. But Green Gold's founder, Rajiv Chalaka, had this wildly risky vision. He actually wanted to rival global giants like Disney by creating original domestic IP. That meant building homegrown characters deeply rooted in Indian culture from scratch, in an environment that literally was not set up to support it.
Section 2. Creating original Indian IP.
So our timeline starts around 2001. Rajiv Chalaka informally founded the studio after switching careers from software engineering and then formally incorporated it in 2004. And during these foundational years, they had to hustle. They took on subcontracted 2D work just to survive and keep the lights on while gaining the technical expertise they needed. But behind the scenes, they were quietly nurturing pilot concepts based on local folklore. All of that relentless, behind-the-scenes groundwork finally culminated in 2008 with the breakthrough debut of their flagship series, Chota Bheem, on Pogo TV.
And let me tell you, Chota Bheem was an instant, massive domestic sensation. So what actually made it work? Well, the anatomy of this hit IP was just deeply cultural. The main character is a young, strong-willed boy inspired by the legendary Bhima from the Mahabharata, but they made him relatable to kids by placing him in the fictional, rustic village of Dholakpur. And this is brilliant. Instead of relying on standard Western tropes like, say, super serums or radioactive spider bites, Bheem gets his superhuman strength from eating traditional, homemade laddu straight from Tuntananti's kitchen. It was just this perfect, highly relatable blend of adventure, humor, and moral lessons that local kids immediately connected with.
Section 3. Scaling into 3D animation. Now, to stay in the game globally, they had to make a massive technological leap. While their early hits, shows like Chota Bheem and the superhero spin-off Mighty Raju, relied entirely on traditional 2D, hand-drawn animation for linear networks like Pogo, they aggressively pivoted. By 2016, to really appeal to international markets, they launched into 3D animation with Super Bheem, fundamentally shifting their focus toward global digital streaming platforms.
And this 3D pivot, it was a total game changer. It directly enabled one of their most monumental milestones to date. In 2019, Mighty Little Bheem premiered as a Netflix original. Green Gold actually became the very first Asian studio to produce a Netflix original global series for kids. Think about that. It launched in over 190 countries and reached an absolutely incredible 40 million young viewers worldwide. The ultimate takeaway here is that mastering a new technology like 3D animation didn't just change how the show looked. It unlocked entirely new global distribution channels. Of course, to feed a machine this big, that modest home office we talked about had to grow. They expanded into a global operation with over 600 employees. Their headquarters stayed in Hyderabad, but they established a really strategic international footprint. They set up shop in Los Angeles to handle merchandising and licensing, Singapore for Asia-Pacific distribution, and the Philippines to provide dedicated outsourcing support for their massive production pipeline.
Section 4. Mastering merchandising and licensing.
All right, let this number sink in for a second. 4,000. Green Gold has generated over 4,000 distinct product SKUs under the Chota Bheem brand alone. They realized really early on that if they wanted to build an empire like Disney, they couldn't just draw cartoons, they had to build a relentless IP monetization machine.
It's an incredibly diverse commercial ecosystem. We're talking over 100 active licensees pumping out toys, apparel, and comics. They've expanded into digital apps, games, and even live-action cinema, like the 2024 film Chota Bheem and the Curse of Damian, which blended practical effects with CGI. They even built an events division, doing over 250 appearances a year, culminating in ventures like a planned themed cafe in Hyderabad. This kind of relentless brand extension is exactly why they've consistently swept Licensor of the Year awards since 2012.
Section 5. Cultural Impact and Criticisms. Now, when an IP reaches this level of massive cultural saturation, it naturally attracts academic and media scrutiny. To truly understand the complexities of this global franchise, we need to objectively examine the criticisms it has faced. This brings us to a prominent critique published in the International Journal of Research. The study actually applied Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity to the show, exploring how repeated portrayals of societal norms in cartoons can subtly shape children's perceptions and socialization.
The core of the journal's findings points to a pretty stark gender disparity in how the characters are constructed. Bheem is portrayed as the hegemonic male. He's this physically formidable savior figure who consistently resolves conflicts. Meanwhile, the main female character, Chutki, is frequently relegated to submissive domestic tasks, like sweeping or making those famous ladus. And she's often depicted in scenarios where she's totally reliant on Bheem for rescue. The academic critique argues that this unequal distribution of agency reinforces ingrained traditional gender roles for young, impressionable viewers.
And it wasn't just academia weighing in. The show has also faced media criticism regarding some of its narrative and production choices. For instance, the Deccan Herald noted that in an attempt to make a rustic boy from a bygone era feel relevant to modern urban children, the creators introduced some pretty jarring anachronisms. Critics pointed out the peculiar, sudden appearance of things like remote-controlled devices and trains in a supposedly ancient setting, right alongside Western tropes like pointy-hatted witches riding broomsticks. On top of that, the publication criticized the early animation quality, saying it lacked fluidity.
So what we're left with is a really fascinating dichotomy when looking at Green Gold's flagship IP. On one hand, it has to balance valid academic critiques regarding gender representation and media critiques about its narrative structure. Yet undeniably, it is widely praised for replacing foreign imports with stories that promote courage, valor, and Indian cultural roots. And from a purely business standpoint, it has achieved unprecedented commercial triumph, completely reshaping the Indian animation landscape and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that domestic IP can compete on massive global stages like Netflix. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative question to consider. We've seen the incredible business journey, right? The strategic pivots, the massive cultural footprint. But as local studios like Green Gold scale into these massive global empires reaching tens of millions of children around the world, how must their storytelling evolve to balance traditional cultural roots with the diverse, modern values of a global audience? It's a hugely complex challenge for the next generation of animators. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this breakdown gave you a clear lens into the fascinating business of animation. Keep analyzing and keep learning.